right, so we're diving into some pretty heady stuff today. Deconstruction, those unwritten rules, those covert contracts that shape our relationships and institutions.
Mhm.
We're going to try to figure out how ideas from folks like Derrida, the Frankfurt School, end up trickling down and affecting our everyday lives. Stuff like art, family dynamics, even the corporate world.
It is wild how we often think of philosophy as this separate thing, right? But it really does have these very real, tangible consequences.
Yeah, for sure. So let's break this down. How can someone listening make sense of all these changes they're seeing, especially in their marriages and stuff? Where do we even start with this?
Well, Derrida, the guy who kind of made deconstruction a thing, had this idea called hauntology. That sounds kind of spooky, I know. But it's basically about how the past is still present, It lingers.
Hauntology, huh? Okay, that's definitely got my attention. It's giving me Ghost of Christmas Past vibes. Uh-huh.
That's a great way to think about it. Think about learning to ride a bike, Maybe your dad running alongside you holding the seat. You can't physically go back to that moment, but the memory, the experience, it shapes how you see things, right? Like masculinity, fatherhood, even just how generations interact.
So it's those experiences, those societal expectations from back then, they're still influencing our relationships now, even if we don't even realize it.
Exactly. And this ontology thing, it's not just personal, it's happening on a bigger level too, with society as a whole. Think about the traditional roles of men and women. Even though things have changed a lot, those old expectations, they can still cause problems in relationships.
Yeah, those unspoken assumptions about who's supposed to earn the money, who takes care of the kids, all that. Those expectations can really feel like some ghost from the past, just haunting us.
Right. It's like we're all following these outdated scripts without even knowing it. And that's where deconstruction comes in.
Okay, yeah, remind me again, what is deconstruction exactly?
Basically, it's about questioning all those meanings and assumptions that we usually just accept without thinking. It's like revealing the hidden power structures in language, in institutions, even in our own minds.
So it's not about just tearing things down, right? It's more about really examining them, being critical.
Yeah, exactly. It's about peeling back the layers, looking for those hidden messages and agendas.
Got it. So could you give me a solid example of how this works in real life?
Well, think about that classic, strong, silent type of guy, right? Construction would make you ask, wait, why is being silent seen as strong? Who decided that? And who benefits from men holding back their emotion? What does that do to relationships when men aren't allowed to be vulnerable?
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like asking, who made these rules and do they even make sense anymore? That's a pretty powerful way to think about things, especially if you're trying to figure out those covert contracts in your marriage, like we were talking about.
Exactly. Deconstruction gives you a way to analyze the power dynamics, to ask if those old rules are still valid or if it's time for some new ones.
Okay, this is starting to click now. You mentioned the Frankfurt School earlier. How do they fit into all of this?
The Frankfurt School is key because they took these really abstract philosophical ideas and applied them to society. They were this group of intellectuals, mostly leftists, and they were really critical of how systems, like mass media especially, could be used to manipulate people, control them.
So they were worried about how these systems, even stuff like art and culture, could influence people without them even realizing it.
Exactly. And they weren't just theorists. They were looking at actual events like the rise of fascism and trying to figure out how whole populations could be swayed by propaganda, by certain ideologies.
You're saying their ideas could help us understand our institutions today, like how they've been influenced, maybe even taken over, as some people say.
Yeah, you got it. Their work gives us a way to examine how power works, how ideology spread, and how institutions can push certain values even when those values aren't doing us any good.
Man, this is getting really interesting. So we've got this idea of hauntology, that the past is still shaping our present. And we've got deconstruction as a way to examine all those hidden structures. And then there's the Frankfurt School, analyzing how these systems can influence us. What a mix. Where do we go from here?
So maybe we can shift gears a little and see how all of this plays out in a very specific area, something you're dealing with directly. I mean, the whole changing landscape of relationships, especially the challenges men face today.
Yeah, I mean, that's where it gets real, right? You're in that married red pill community trying to figure out what's going on in your own marriage, maybe even trying to change those unspoken rules, those covert contracts that no one ever really talks about.
Right, and it's really important to remember that those personal struggles, they're not happening in a vacuum. They're connected to these bigger social and intellectual trends that we've been talking about.
Okay, so how do we connect the dots? How do these ideas, the hauntology, the deconstruction, the Frankfurt School, how do they shed light on the problems men are facing, especially when it comes to marriage and family?
Well, let's think about that classic image of the breadwinner the man as the provider for the family. That expectation is like ingrained in our history. It's one of those ghosts from the past that Derrida was talking about.
And that's definitely something that's changed a lot, right? With more women working, the financial side of relationships has gotten way more complicated.
Exactly. And for men who were brought up with that old breadwinner mentality, this change can be really tough. It can make them feel inadequate, like they're not fulfilling their role as men.
Yeah, I can see that. It's like that fundamental part of being a man, the idea of providing, being the protector, it's being challenged.
And it goes beyond just money, too. Those traditional roles, they were everywhere in the relationship. The man was supposed to be the strong, silent type, the decision maker, the one who keeps everything together.
Right, and now those expectations are being questioned. Men are being told they need to be more emotional, more in touch with their feelings, more vulnerable.
Yeah, and that can be super confusing, right? It's like the rules have changed, but no one told us what the new rules are.
Like those old scripts, those covert contracts are suddenly being rewritten. And some guys are feeling lost. They don't know how to handle these new expectations.
And that's where the Frankfurt School's ideas come in. They were really worried about how powerful systems like media, education, even the family itself could shape people, mold them into certain roles.
So you're saying that men are being molded, maybe even manipulated by these forces, that they're being told how to act, how to feel, even how to be men.
I mean, it's not always intentional or like some evil plan, but these systems, these institutions, they have a way of reinforcing certain values, certain narratives, even if those narratives are outdated or harmful.
Wow, that's kind of a scary thought. So if these systems are so powerful, how do we break free from those old scripts, those limiting expectations?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think it all starts with awareness. Recognizing that those old scripts even exist and that they're not like natural or inevitable.
So it's about understanding the history, how those expectations came to be, and the systems that keep them going.
Exactly. And then it's about having the guts to question those expectations, to rewrite those scripts, to figure out new ways of being a man, a husband, a father that feel more authentic and fulfilling.
So we're not talking about throwing out all traditional values. It's more about adapting them, updating them.
Right. There's still a lot of good stuff in those traditional roles, things like strength, responsibility, loyalty, but we got to redefine those things, find new ways to express them that work in the world today.
It's like taking those basic principles and making them work for the 21st century. So instead of being the stoic, silent provider, maybe it's about being an involved, present father who can also be vulnerable and show his emotions.
Yeah, exactly. It's about finding that balance, that integration of traditional values and modern ideas. And honestly, that's a journey every man has to go on for himself. There's no one right answer for everybody.
Man, this is really making me think. We've gone from these big, abstract, philosophical ideas to some very real struggles that guys are going through in their everyday lives. I'm curious, how does all of this show up in art and literature?
Oh, that's a perfect segue. Because art and literature, they're not just entertainment, they're a reflection of our culture, our values, what we're worried about. And as these ideas about masculinity and relationships have changed, we see those changes reflected in the art we create and enjoy.
So it's like art is a mirror, showing us the changes that are happening in society and in our own lives. That's a really interesting thought. I guess that's where we'll head next. So we've been digging into how these big ideas, ontology, deconstruction, the Frankfurt School, have changed how we think about masculinity and relationship. Now I want to see how this stuff shows up in art and literature.
It's really interesting how art acts as this kind of mirror, reflecting our values, our anxieties, how we understand the world, all of that.
So how has this whole deconstruction thing changed the art world? It's not like artists are like carrying around philosophy textbooks, are they?
Well, think about what deconstruction is all about. Questioning those accepted meanings, challenging traditional forms, embracing ambiguity. All of those things can be applied to art in really cool ways.
Okay, I need some examples. I'm a visual kind of guy. What does deconstructed art actually look like?
Think about an artist like Barbara Kruger, for example. She takes those familiar images you see in advertising, mass media, that kind of stuff, but she adds text that kind of flips their meaning, It's like she's uncovering the hidden message, the power dynamics behind those images that seem innocent at first.
Let's see. So it's like taking something familiar and turning it upside down, making us look at it in a whole new way.
Exactly. And it can be really powerful, especially when it's challenging those traditional ideas about what it means to be a man. Think about someone like Cindy Sherman. She uses photography to look at how women are portrayed in the media, but she does it by putting herself in those roles, playing with stereotypes and showing how artificial those images actually are.
That makes sense. By deconstructing those images, those narratives, we can start to see how they've been influencing us,
Yeah.
maybe even limiting our understanding of what's possible.
Yeah, totally. And it's not just about visual art either. Deconstruction has had a massive impact on literature as well. Think about those novels that mix genres, that don't fit neatly into one box. It's like they're breaking down those old, rigid structures and creating something totally new, something more fluid, more dynamic.
It's like saying there's not just one right way to tell a story, no single perspective that holds all the truth.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be a challenge for some folks, especially those who are holding on to those old narratives, those traditional views of the world. When you start deconstructing those narratives, it can feel like the ground is shaking under them.
So, how does all of this relate to the person listening? Why should they care about deconstruction in art?
Because art isn't just something we hang on the wall or read, right? It shapes our culture, influences our values. It even gets into our subconscious and changes how we see the world.
So, if art is reflecting these deconstructed narratives, these new ways of thinking about masculinity, relationships, and power, it's also influencing how we think about those things in our own lives.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to pay attention to these trends, to engage with them critically, to ask ourselves, how is this affecting me? How is this shaping my perception?
So, it's not just about appreciating art for how it looks or sounds. It's about understanding the ideas behind it, the conversations it starts, the way it challenges what we think we know.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that art can be a powerful force for change, for helping us understand ourselves and the world better.
Man, this has been an incredible deep dive. We went from these kind of heady philosophical concepts to real world stuff about relationships, institutions, even the art we experience every day.
And remember, this is really just scratching the surface. These ideas are complex and there's always more to uncover.
Yeah, for sure. We've given you a framework, some tools to think critically, but the real journey starts when you apply these ideas to your own life, your relationships, how you see the world.
And if you're interested in going deeper, I really recommend checking out the book that inspired this whole conversation. You can find it on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
It's been a great discussion, and I hope it's given you some new things to think about. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going.